So let's quickly review what we should try to accomplish when we're engaged in a close reading. We already did the first few steps in the previous video. We took notes and we recorded our reactions. We entered into a kind of dialogue with the text. We thought as we were reading about connections that we could make with the material. This time around, we're going to try to identify the main ideas and purpose, and we're going to examine some of the evidence and support for the author's claims. So let's think a little bit more specifically about what the main idea or argument of this text is. Often we'll find this information in the first few paragraphs of a text. In this case, that isn't exactly where we find it. We do find a definition of this really important concept of scope and sensitivity, but the actual main argument is articulated right at the end. This is another commonplace. If the author does not lay out their main idea at the beginning, often they'll do so by the end. In this case, it's actually pretty easy because Yudkowsky says straightforwardly, this is the moral. This is the main takeaway message that he wants us to understand. If you want to be an effective altruist, you have to think it through with the part of your brain that processes those unexciting inky zeros on the paper, not just the part that gets real worked up about that poor, struggling, oil-soaked bird. Okay, let's try to rephrase that and put everything together from what we've learned from this article. So, the main idea. If we want to have the biggest possible impact through our moral actions, we need to be aware of the effect of scope insensitivity, which is the inability of the human mind to properly weigh the effect of one's actions as the scope increases. If our goal is to minimize suffering and maximize the well-being of the life forms we care about, we need to carefully calculate the results of our actions and not just rely on our moral intuitions or emotions. Okay, so I'm going a little bit beyond what Yudkowsky literally says there at the end, but I'm trying to pull together all of the different strands of the text. The things that I really want to mention are, what's the meaning of scope and sensitivity? Why does Yudkowsky care about this? He cares about this because he's interested in how we can be more moral. And the kind of morality that he's interested in has to do with having the biggest measurable effect, taking actions that have the best consequences. And the way to do that, Yudkowsky says, because humans have a hard time understanding things at large scales, we have a hard time just visualizing the impact when we're thinking about thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of beings affected. The way to do that is that we have to just crunch the numbers. We can't just rely on our usual moral intuitions, which are quite good at directing us a lot of the time at smaller scale, everyday life moral situations. So let's think a little bit about the evidence that he uses to back up this claim. You can see right here at the end of the text are footnotes that refer to all of the different sources Yudkowsky uses to back up his ideas. In general, what we see throughout this text is a reliance on expert testimony, so ideas from people like Daniel Kahneman, and the results of studies. So he's not the one who's conducting these studies. He's relying on studies that have been done by others, but he's trying to extract something important from them and apply them to a concrete moral dilemma. So the evidence studies that suggest that people do not change their moral actions when the scale increases beyond a certain point. Or at least they don't change it noticeably. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this part. It's a very short piece. The evidence is straightforward. If we were concerned about the evidence in some way, we could look up each of these texts. From a cursory examination, they all look to be fairly legitimate. I know I recognize the name of Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist. This seems like it's legit research that's based on. It's a little bit old. Many of these studies are from the 1990s, but presumably, unless something has been done to directly contradict this evidence, we should probably think that it's fairly reputable.